After 3 years of marriage, Henry casually suggested a sham divorce for his first love, Emma. A cold laugh rose within me. He thought I was still deeply devoted to him. But he had no idea that this arrogant proposal was exactly the liberation I had longed for. Today marked Henry and my third wedding anniversary. I booked a private room and invited all my good friends. My friends raised their glasses, wishing us lifelong happiness, and I shyly accepted, my face beaming with joy. During the banquet, I quietly slipped away, brought back a handmade cake, and gently placed it in front of Henry, gazing at him with tender affection. Henry, happy third anniversary. Thank you for always being by my side. But remained as unperturbed as ever, merely giving a slight nod, and my heart couldn't help but ache faintly. Ever since I discovered his secret, he had been this cold. I kept telling myself that he still cared for me. However, as we were cutting the cake, Henry's expression suddenly changed after taking a phone call. He immediately grabbed his jacket and rushed out, leaving only me and a room full of friends. I stood frozen in place. All eyes were on me. My face was pale, but I forced myself to remain calm. Henry must have an emergency, he'll be back soon. These words were both an explanation to them and a comfort to myself. I looked at the cake before me, my fingers unconsciously rubbing the band-aid. This cake had taken me an entire morning to make. Fortunately, Henry didn't keep me waiting too long, but he didn't return alone, another woman was with him. I narrowed my eyes and cautiously asked, "Who is this?" Henry sounded quite impatient. "Emma, my secretary." I nodded, but a whirlwind of emotions churned inside me. Emma, his former first love, how could I not recognize her? I tactfully said, bringing Emma to an occasion like this seems a bit inappropriate, doesn't it? Henry's brows furrowed, and he scolded in a low voice, "What's inappropriate about it?" Me. When did you become so accustomed to making a big deal out of nothing? He pulled Emma to a seat, leaving me standing alone across from them. Glancing at Henry's friends' expressions, I instantly understood they had known all along and were just covering for him. I had originally hoped to spend this anniversary peacefully, to finish this cake completely, but wouldn't give me that chance. Soon after we sat down, Emma claimed she wasn't feeling well. Henry immediately panicked, insisting on taking her away. Before leaving, he seemed to remember me, his wife, a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, unsure how to address me. I glanced at Emma, her face was rosy, and she looked full of energy. There wasn't a hint of discomfort about her. Yet I played along, pretending to be concerned. "Quick, take Ms. Emma to the hospital. Don't delay." Hearing my words, Emma piteously hugged Henry's arm. Henry's face darkened instantly, and he angrily scolded, "Mia, how did you become so unreasonable? I was planning to come back for you, but now you can just leave by yourself." With that, he put his arm around Emma's waist and slammed the door as he left. I gave a helpless tug at the corners of my mouth, then turned and threw the cake into the trash can. There was no point in eating this cake anymore. As for Henry, I didn't want him anymore either. After a brief farewell to Henry's friends, I left alone. I hailed a cab on the roadside, took a deep breath, and called Margaret. "Mom, I've decided. I'm divorcing Henry." Margaret sounded surprised at first, then worried, wondering if something had happened to me. I finally couldn't hold it in anymore and poured out all the grievances I had accumulated recently. "My child, you've suffered so much. I'll start making arrangements right away. That is a real scumbag. My darling girl, and he dares to mess around outside." After a few more words with Margaret, I hung up. Margaret had actually urged me to get a divorce long ago, saying Henry wasn't a good match. But back then, I was blinded by love and insisted on marrying him. Now, my heart was utterly exhausted. Back home, I was surprised to find Henry's car parked outside. My heart lurched. Had he returned? I took out my key and opened the door, and the sight before me made me freeze. Right by the door were a pair of black high heels and a pair of men's leather shoes. I never wore high heels, so the owner of those shoes was obvious. I looked up, only then noticing clothes strewn from the entryway to the living room, and then into the bedroom. I followed the trail of clothes to the bedroom door. It was ajar, and the last item of clothing was a black thong. Henry was so outrageous. He actually brought Emma home. I suppressed my tears and fury, quietly taking photos of everything. The intimate sounds coming from the bedroom made my heart twist in agony. After collecting the evidence, I quietly left. On the soft bed in the hotel, I tossed and turned, unable to stop recalling the sweet times Henry and I once shared. We had once had a period of undeniable closeness. However, everything quietly changed after I stepped into his study, a room he never allowed me to enter. His was always kept locked, but that day, I unexpectedly found the door slightly ajar. I called out to him a few times, but there was no answer. I intended to help close the door, but then I noticed a sticker on the desk that read, "My little darling Emma." The rest of the text was covered, piquing my curiosity. Pushing the door open, the full text of the sticker made me freeze in place, "My little darling Emma." Next to it was a photo of a woman with straight black hair, bangs, and a sweet smile. Emma? The name was both strange and jarring to me. My gaze shifted, and I found a notebook lying on the desk, which appeared to be Henry's diary. I couldn't help but open it, and with each page I turned, my heart sank a little deeper. The diary was filled with deep affection for Emma, and yet I, his wife, was nowhere to be found in its pages. My heart twisted in agony when Henry suddenly burst in. Seeing me holding the diary, his expression panicked. "Mia, put that down." I demanded to know who Emma was, and his face went cold. "Mia, don't go too far. You don't need to know who Emma is." With that, he snatched the diary, clutching it tightly to his chest as if it were his most precious treasure. "Get out." His words were cold and absolute. I was utterly stunned. He actually told me to get out? In all our years together, he had never been so rude to me. Seeing me frozen in place, he actually pushed me. I stumbled as he forced me out of the study, falling at the doorway. Looking up, he glanced at me with an emotionless expression, then slammed the door shut with a bang. From that day on, he started giving me the silent treatment, right up until today. But now, none of it mattered. I had decided to give up on him. A rotten man, like a piece of decaying fruit, only inspires disgust. The next day, I went home to pack my things. As soon as I opened the door, a scent of food wafted out. I walked inside and found Henry surprisingly in the kitchen, cooking. Hearing the sound, he turned and looked at me, a clear hint of panic in his eyes. "Mia, why are you back?" I found it amusing. "This is my home, why can't I come back?" Henry frowned. "That's not what I meant." I ignored him, intending to go to the bedroom to get my things, but Henry frantically stopped me. I was confused. Had not left yet? But I had just seen that the high heels were no longer by the door. Henry suddenly changed his expression, acting like his old self. He gently took my arm and led me to the dining room. He pulled out a chair for me, then pressed down on my shoulders. Unsure what he was doing, I sat down, following his lead. He went to the kitchen and brought out a pot of porridge, smiling as he dished a bowl for me. "Gracie, try this. Henry specially made this loving breakfast for you." I stirred the ridge in my bowl with the spoon, unable to suppress a cold laugh. Henry's face slightly contorted, and displeased, he slammed the table. "Mia, why are you in such a bad mood? I kindly made you porridge, and you won't drink it?" In a flash, I slammed the spoon onto the floor, startling Henry. He was about to scold me, but I spoke first. "Henry, we've been together for 3 years, and you don't know I have a seafood allergy? Are you trying to kill me by specifically making me seafood porridge?" Henry instantly deflated, speechless. "I'm sorry, Gracie, I forgot." I was utterly disappointed with Henry. He couldn't remember anything about what I didn't eat or what I was allergic to. But what Emma liked and disliked, he remembered perfectly. I took an apple from the refrigerator and ate it, not even looking at Henry. I left home and went back to the hotel, pondering how to file for divorce, worried I didn't have enough evidence. Just as I was fretting, Henry suddenly called me. "Gracie, there's something I need to discuss with you. Can we meet?" I was sparing with my words. "Speak." Henry paused, then sounded somewhat hurt. "Gracie, why are you so cold to me now?" I didn't want him to suspect anything for now, so I pretended to be my old self. "What are you talking about?" "Henry, just tell me what's on your mind." As soon as I said that, Henry quickly dropped the topic of my attitude and continued, "It's just that I want us to get a sham divorce first. Then and I will get married so I can legitimize her child, and after that, we'll remarry. She really needs me right now." I paused, then burst out laughing. It was just what I needed. Henry sounded confused. "What are you laughing at?" I suppressed my laughter and feigned calmness. "Nothing. When do you want to go to the county's office?" Henry eagerly replied, "Tomorrow, then." I readily agreed, which made Henry feel uneasy. "Mia? Aren't you angry?" I thought to myself, since he brought it up, I shouldn't let him get suspension. Issues. So I feigned a wrong tone. "Oh, Henry, I understand. Ms. Emma is a pitiable woman too. This little bit of hardship is nothing." Hearing me say that, Henry finally relaxed. I then nonchalantly humored Henry for a few more minutes, delighting him immensely. After hanging up, I couldn't help but laugh to myself. How could Henry even have the nerve to make such a request? If this had happened before, I would have thrown a huge fit and threatened everything, begging him not to divorce. He probably would have just found me annoying and coerced me into it anyway. But now, his request was perfectly aligned with my own desires. But got pregnant so quickly. It seems they must have been together behind my back quite a lot. I called Margaret. Mom, you don't need to do anything. Henry has voluntarily asked for a divorce. Margaret immediately got angry. What's wrong with Henry? How dare he even suggest it? Seeing her reaction, I quickly explained the whole story to Margaret, and she finally understood. That is truly a scumbag, willing to be that woman's patsy. My darling girl has been wronged. I laughed and joked with Margaret for a bit, steering the conversation away from that topic. As we chatted, Margaret suddenly sighed. I quickly asked what was wrong. Margaret then sighed. I don't know if you still remember William? That boy used to like you. 3 years ago, when he heard you got married, he just left for abroad. Recently, he heard you were getting a divorce and came back. I think he still has feelings for you. The family is doing well now too. If it's an arranged marriage, we wouldn't be at a disadvantage. See if you have any thoughts, if not, I'll tell William no. I was startled. William? I still remembered him from university. After all, it had been 3 years since we last met. I fell silent. Margaret thought I was refusing and was about to say she'd tell William's family to forget it. But the next second, I suddenly spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but it was perfectly clear. Mom, then arrange for us to meet. Margaret was stunned, then, realizing what I meant, she exclaimed good, 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 several times. Finally, we scheduled a meeting for the day after tomorrow at noon. I smiled and agreed, and Margaret happily hung up. I looked at my phone, thinking of the life ahead, and couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The next morning, I got ready early and went to the county's office. Henry hadn't arrived yet, so I played on my phone in the car for a while. As I was playing, I glanced at the time. It was already 10 o'clock, and Henry still hadn't shown up. I felt a pang of irritation. I called Henry. The phone rang for almost a minute before it was finally answered. Impatiently, I said, Henry, what are you doing? Before I could finish, I heard intimate sounds coming from the other end of the line. Emma giggled sweetly, telling Henry to go easy. My face expressionless, I was about to hang up when I saw an old man, vendor, selling ice pops nearby. His kept blaring ice pops, ice pops. An idea formed in my mind. I got out of the car and negotiated with the old man, vendor, eventually giving him 1,000 yuan to buy the right to use his loudspeaker. I tied the loudspeaker to my car's rearview mirror, then placed my phone next to it. Immediately, Henry and Emma's voices were amplified through the large loudspeaker for all to hear. I curved my lips into a smile, leisurely picked up a fashion magazine nearby, and read it as I waited for Henry. Another hour passed, and Henry finally arrived. Quick-witted, I saw him coming and immediately turned off the loudspeaker. Henry was looking around the entrance of the county's office when I appeared, holding the loudspeaker. He wasn't even trying to hide it. The stain on his collar hadn't been wiped off, and the hickey on his neck was clearly visible. He asked, confused, why are you carrying a loudspeaker? I replied that it was nothing and returned the loud speaker to the old man, vendor. Seeing that I had finished, Henry said, let's go, and walked ahead by himself. Behind him, I suddenly pretended to twist my ankle and cried out Henry's name. Henry impatiently turned around. What now? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that many people had already noticed Henry, and then I subtly curved my lips. After all, the loudspeaker had just broadcast all his and Emma's words. Emma had certainly called him Henry, sweetheart, more than a few times. I got up and limped over to Henry. It's nothing. Henry glanced at me, then suddenly looked triumphant. You're regretting it, aren't you? You don't want to divorce anymore? Playing little tricks to get my attention? Mia, you sounded so carefree on the phone, but you still can't let go of me, can you? Let me tell you, don't waste your breath. We're definitely divorcing today. I looked at Henry, suddenly recalling the day we registered our marriage 3 years ago. His eyes full of love, he happily held my hand and said he was committing to me for this lifetime, that we would never be apart, and that only death would separate us, never divorce. Thinking about it now, it was truly laughable. The further we walked inside, the more people watched Henry. He probably found it strange, furrowing his brows, not knowing what was going on. I secretly smiled behind him. The process was quite quick, but we still had to wait for the 30-day divorce waiting period. We then went our separate ways. To celebrate my impending freedom from that scumbag, a few friends had prepared a party for me, aptly named Out with the Old, In with the New, and insisted I attend. I agreed, amused, and immediately drove there. As I reached the entrance of the reserved private room and was about to push the door open, I heard someone call my name. I instinctively turned around. To my surprise, I saw Emma. She looked surprised to see me too and walked towards me. Mia, I didn't expect to see you here. What brings you here? Are you out having fun? She finished, then sized me up with a sneer. With the way you're dressed, you don't look like you're here to have fun. You're looking for Henry, aren't you? Henry was here too? I instinctively frowned. What a nuisance. But took my frown as an affirmation. She smiled and suddenly grabbed my arm enthusiastically, pulling me in another direction. Curious about what she was up to, I followed. She pulled me into a private room. As soon as I walked in, everyone present fell silent. Look everyone, Mia is here too. Emma released my hand and ran to Henry's side, smiling radiantly. Henry seemed to feel a bit awkward. He gently removed Emma's hand and looked at me. Gracie, how did you know I was here? I gestured to Emma. I didn't know. She brought me. Emma looked bewildered and quickly explained. I saw Mia standing outside our private room and thought she was looking for Henry. I said nothing. Henry suddenly looked triumphant, and as if bestowing a favor upon me, he said, since you're here, have a seat, Mia. Today is a day to celebrate, so you might as well enjoy yourself. A wave of nausea swept over me. How could Henry have the nerve to say something like that? What good day? The good day we decided to divorce? I didn't want to deal with him and was about to leave when he suddenly stepped forward and grabbed me. Mia, are you angry? What, you can't live without me? Are you playing hard to get, hoping I'll withdraw the divorce application? As he spoke, he forced a glass of high-proof alcohol down my throat. I couldn't break free and had no choice but to swallow it. After hearing his words, I laughed, a purely exasperated laugh. Why hadn't I realized Henry was so shameless before? Seeing my silence, Henry thought he had read my mind and continued confidently, I'm telling you, Mia, forget a sham divorce. Even a real divorce, you'll have to endure. You brought it on yourself. Who told you to always be disobedient? But say, how obedient you've been about this. I'm planning to give you a gift. Tell me, do you want money or a handbag? Before I could answer, I suddenly felt unbearable abdominal pain. I clutched the door frame, wanting to leave, but Henry held me back, not letting me go. Sweat poured down my face from the pain. I don't know where I found the strength, but I suddenly pushed Henry away and stumbled out. Holding on for dear life, I reached my friend's private room, only managing to gasp, "Take me to the hospital," before I fainted. When I woke up, my best friend Sarah was looking at me, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. I was puzzled and asked her, "Why are you crying?" Sarah covered her face and told me, "Gracie, you miscarried." I froze, unconsciously touching my belly. I was pregnant? I had absolutely no idea. I hadn't experienced any pregnancy symptoms, and my periods are irregular, so I never even considered it. But couldn't be lying to me. I stared blankly at Sarah. Really? Sarah nodded. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, blankly clutching my stomach. There had once been a tiny life here, but I hadn't protected it. Sarah couldn't hold back anymore and cried into my ear, "The doctor said your health hasn't been good lately, and your emotions fluctuated too much. There was already a risk, and drinking that high-proof alcohol is what caused it." I remembered. It was the drink Henry had forced me to have. Tears streamed down my face. "Henry, our child was killed by your own hands. Are you satisfied now?" I turned to Sarah. "This secret is just between us. Don't tell anyone else. This child, let's just pretend it never was." A month flashed by, and I was successfully discharged from the hospital. Henry and I went to the county's office once more. Walking out, I looked at the divorce certificate in my hand and suddenly smiled. At this moment, I finally had a new lease on life. After finalizing the divorce, Henry and I were about to part ways at the county's OFFI. See. As I was leaving, Henry suddenly called out to me, sounding hesitant. I had no patience for his nonsense and told him to just say what he wanted to say. He seemed unable to quite adjust to my tone, frowning. "Tonight, I'll take you to the Lux. As a reward for being so cooperative, you can have dinner with me." I burst out laughing. I shook the divorce certificate in my hand, scoffing at him. "Henry, we're already divorced. Understand your place." Henry frowned. "Mia, what are you playing at? Wasn't it a sham divorce?" I smiled even more brightly. "You're so corrupted, why would I bother with a sham divorce with you? Isn't it better to truly divorce?" Henry was unusually flustered. He came over and grabbed my hand. "Gracie, stop fooling around. It's a sham divorce, right?" I slowly pried his fingers off my hand, just as he had once pried my hands away to go to Emma. I uttered each word distinctly, Henry, we are over. After that day, I left quickly. Henry soon realized what happened and started inundating me with calls and texts. I ignored them all, deleting and blocking him in one go. Are you kidding? If he regretted it, what was he doing before? And I returned to my family, officially taking over the family business. During this time, I also made time to meet William. The sunny, lively boy I once knew had grown into the silent and reserved air of the William. Margaret said he liked me, but he looked cold and unapproachable. I didn't want to date another iceberg, so I declined any further contact. Who would have thought that day, after finishing work at the company and getting my car to go home, I would encounter Henry in the parking garage. Henry was leaning against my car. He only looked up when my car lights flashed twice, and a flicker of surprise crossed his eyes as he saw me. Gracie, why did you block me? I couldn't reach you at all. I finally found you. I was unmoved. What do you want? Henry reached for my hand, but I sidestepped, avoiding him. A flicker of hurt crossed his eyes. Gracie, what's wrong? Why are you so cold to me now? I sneered. Is this interesting, Henry? You're wasting my time. Don't bother me, whether you have something to say or not. We're over. The word over seemed to provoke Henry. He suddenly reached out, wrapped his arms around me, and pressed me against his chest. No, I don't want us to be over. Gracie, you still love me, don't you? You're just angry right now, angry about Emma and me, right? I'll change everything. I'll delete Emma right now. Please don't be angry, okay? I looked at him and felt a profound calm inside. So, this is what it felt like to be implored, a calm, even a touch of annoyance. Was this how Henry felt when I desperately pleaded with him? Looking at Henry, I only felt that I had been utterly ridiculous back then. I pushed Henry, telling him to let go, but he didn't listen at all, just held me tighter and tighter. I was starting to struggle for breath when Henry, who was holding me captive, was suddenly pulled away by another strong force, and I fell into a different embrace. I was startled. Looking up, I saw William's chin. Henry, stunned, narrowed his eyes as he watched William holding me. Mia, you dare to find a mistress. I hadn't wanted to continue talking to Henry, but his words instantly ignited my fury. I pulled away from William's embrace and rushed to Henry, slapping him across the face. Henry, stunned by the blow, held his face, motionless for a long moment. Henry, don't judge others by your own low standards. William and I are innocent. Not everyone keeps a mistress like you do. Besides, we're already divorced. So what if I'm dating? What business is it of yours? Henry reached out to grab me, still trying to argue even after I laid out the facts. No, it's not like that, Gracie, I had my reasons. Was our time together, all our love, fake? I laughed. Henry, doesn't your conscience bother you saying that? You were the one who personally destroyed our home. Henry stared blankly at me. I had no intention of getting entangled with him, so I pulled William into the car, and we drove away. In the car, William didn't say a word. I was speechless. This was nothing like Margaret said about him liking me for years. Who could tell he liked me? Finally, I broke the silence. Where do you live? I'll drop you off. William then spoke stiffly, Mia, I want to pursue you. Can you give me a chance? I jumped, quickly pulling the car over to the side of the road. Only then did I look at William. Seeing his gaze falter, refusing to meet mine, I finally understood. He wasn't aloof, he was just shy. I burst out laughing and suddenly leaned closer. As expected, William froze, hesitantly saying, Mia, a kiss now might be a bit too soon, right? Hearing that, I found it amusing. I reached out and flicked his forehead. Dream on. William sighed in relief at my words, but then a hint of regret appeared in his eyes. I found it entertaining. Being pursued by someone who genuinely liked me seemed quite nice. I agree. It took William a long moment to process my words before he immediately broke into a smile. Seeing his smile, my mood suddenly brightened too. Oh, you do smile. Hearing that, William's smile froze. Then, to my surprise, I could detect a hint of feeling wronged in his expression. I soothed him with a few words, and he immediately cheered up. Speaking of which, William was 2 years younger than me. There's definitely something appealing about dating younger. Finally, I drove William home and then returned to my own place. That evening, while I was working, I habitually reached for water, only to find the glass empty. I had to get up and pour myself some water. But my mind was still on work issues, so I didn't notice the water had already filled. The overflowing water scalded my hand. I had no choice but to quickly endure the pain and go to the hospital to get it bandaged. The doctor advised me that I had to keep it wrapped in a bandage for a few days and not let it touch water, otherwise it could get infected. So, I had to go to work with a bandage on my hand. Everyone I met on the way asked a few concerned questions, and I replied to each that I had accidentally scalded myself. After arriving at my office, just as I sat down, hurried footsteps sounded outside. The next second, my secretary's voice came through. "Ms. Mia, Mr. William from the William would like to see you." I nodded, telling him to let him in, wondering what he was doing here. As soon as William entered, his eyes immediately fell on my hand. He took out the anti-inflammatory cream he had prepared and started to apply it. I couldn't argue with him, so I acquiesced, sitting on the sofa and patiently waiting for him to finish applying it. He gazed earnestly at my hand, a hint of panic in his expression. My heart suddenly softened. Perhaps, being with William wouldn't be so bad. Thinking of this, I suddenly asked him, "What do you think about Margaret's suggestion for an arranged marriage for me?" William paused his movements, then casually continued to apply the medicine. His tone seemed casual, but he was incredibly nervous. "Of course, I respect your decision. Follow your heart and don't worry about me. I just want you to be happy." Seeing him like that, I couldn't bear to tease him further. I got straight to the point. "I agree. Let's get engaged." William was truly stunned this time. He blinked, glanced at me, then slowly continued to apply the medicine to my hand. I, however, was utterly confused. What did that mean? Was he agreeing or not? After he finally finished applying the medicine, before I could even react, William suddenly leaned in and kissed my forehead. I looked at him. He happily said, "All right, it's sealing the deal now, no backing out." I smiled, actively wrapped my arms around his neck, and kissed his lips. "Let me teach you, this is sealing the deal." William was truly stunned this time. His face grew redder and redder, until he was so flushed I felt like he was going to cook. I quickly let go of him. Looking at his delighted expression, I felt a bit overwhelmed. Just one kiss had him like this, what would happen later? I was helpless, yet also very much looking forward to it. Days passed. On the eve of William and my engagement, an avalanche of online abuse suddenly erupted against me. I took the phone my colleague handed me and found it laughable to watch Emma in the video, tearfully complaining about my actions. I didn't know what was going on between her and Henry, but it seemed Henry wasn't as concerned about her as before. She was crying on a live stream, telling the camera how I had interfered in her and Henry's relationship. She claimed I had forced her to abort her child, forced Henry not to marry her, and a whole host of other things I knew nothing about. Emma was innocent looking, and with her tears, she looked even more pathetically sweet on camera, attracting countless gullible online users to speak up for her and guiding them to collectively abuse me. I sneered at Emma on my phone. I hadn't originally intended to release those video, audio, and photos, but since Emma had voluntarily presented herself, it wouldn't be right not to. I checked the online comments and saw that the insults aimed at me were just the same few words over and over. They might not be tired of reading them, but I certainly was. "Bitch, the other woman destroying relationships, why should she live well?" Things like that. I didn't care. I was editing the evidence, preparing to publish it, when my secretary suddenly came in and said someone downstairs insisted on seeing me, claiming his last name was Gu. I realized. It must be Henry. I had thought Henry had completely vanished from my world, but I never imagined I'd still be involved with him. An idea struck me. I quietly tapped something on my phone, then propped it up nearby. Only then did I tell my SEC readery to bring him in. He walked in, saw me, and immediately began to explain anxiously, "Gracie, I didn't tell her to say any of that. Don't misunderstand me. I've made it clear to her not to pester me, but she's pregnant with my child, and I can't just ignore it." I felt helpless. Henry always made himself look so innocent, as if he were playing the innocent victim, untouched by the world. But in reality, he was just avoiding the problem. The whole mess started because of him, yet he refused to admit it. I waited for him to finish his rambling, then slowly spoke. "Henry, do you remember how we first met?" At this, Henry suddenly became confident. "Of course, I remember, Gracie. We met at the crafts club during the club recruitment fair at university. We both picked out the same type of beads and made identical beaded bracelets." Henry finished in one breath, then glanced at me smugly, as if to say, "I remembered everything, so you must love me for it." I smiled slightly and said, "Then do you still remember where your beaded bracelet is?" Henry regained his confidence and was about to speak, but then his face instantly changed. Of course, I knew why his expression had suddenly changed. He had remembered that he had long ago given that beaded bracelet to Emma, who was fidgeting with it. Seeing his reaction, I felt a sense of satisfaction. I said coldly, "You remembered, didn't you? Why don't you say it?" "I'll say it for you. You gave it to Emma a long time ago." Henry continued to argue. I didn't mean to, Gracie. You can't blame me for everything. Who told you to insist on searching my study during that time? If you hadn't insisted, I wouldn't have done that. I laughed at that. So, Henry, if I hadn't actively discovered it, how long would you have kept your feelings for Emma a secret from me? You had been in contact with her for who knows how long before I found out, and after I found out, you didn't even try to hide it. You brought your mistress right into our home. Henry, you're still trying to gaslight me? You're truly beyond help. I'm going to release the evidence of your affair with Emma. You too will suffer everything I've suffered. With that, no matter how much Henry repented, I had the security guards escort him out. I picked up my phone, which was still on live stream, glanced at the comments, smiled, and then published the evidence I had just compiled. In less than 2 hours, public opinion immediately reversed. Online users were now all condemning Henry and Emma, and the abuse against me stopped. Many online users even came to apologize to me, saying they hadn't seen clearly before and had offended me by believing the scumbag and his conniving partner. I ignored them all. These people didn't even have the ability to distinguish right from wrong, quick to jump to conclusions. There was no need for me to accept their apologies. After the public opinion reversed, Henry's company's stock prices plummeted, and several business deals that had been finalized fell through. Henry was overwhelmed, busy every day. After her facade was shattered, Emma didn't dare to continue her live stream. She even issued a statement, saying she stepped away from social media, hoping to generate a wave of sympathy. But the comment section was entirely filled with insults against her. The I released irrefutably proven their guilt, and some even dug up the intimate video of them that I had played at the county's office. And after all these events, Henry and Emma got married. This was unexpected, but it was fine. It saved them from causing trouble for others. During this time, I hadn't been idle either. I had completely taken over the family business, and my parents had successfully retired, planning to travel the world together. The day I saw them off at the airport, Margaret winked playfully at me. "Make things work with William. Margaret is looking forward to some good news from you too." I pretended to be shy and leaned over Margaret's shoulder. "Margaret, you're incorrigible." Margaret smiled, then held hands with my father and boarded the plane. Watching their backs, I suddenly remembered that as a child, I too would watch my parents holding hands and think that one day I would find someone just like my father, who was single-minded and only had my mother in his heart, to spend my life with. I once thought Henry was that person, but after everything that happened, I realized I was terribly wrong. Thankfully, my hardships were finally over. Just then, a pair of large hands suddenly intertwined with mine. I didn't turn my head, but I knew it was William. He grinned and leaned his head closer to mine. "Don't be sad. You're jealous that your parents are traveling, aren't you? After we get married, we'll go on our honeymoon too, and we'll travel the world." I smiled, meeting his gaze. "Oh really? Already planning our honeymoon trip?" "I haven't even said yes yet." William panicked, gripping my hand even tighter. He asked uncertainly, "But we're already engaged. Are you really going to abandon me for another?" "Wha, Mia." I didn't know where William learned that, but when he suddenly called me Mia, my heart immediately started pounding. It felt like I had rediscovered the feeling of being smitten with someone. I looked at William, and he looked at me. The thought of spending the rest of my life with him actually felt quite exciting. Thank you for watching today's story. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it with your friends. We look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Feel free to share your perspectives, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more exciting stories. See you next time.